The planet Aquatica X was a world that hated the very idea of life. It was a globe entirely covered by a single churning ocean, miles deep in every direction. There were no islands. There was no surface to speak of beyond a violent, storm-tossed crust of salt water. But the true story of Aquatica X wasn't on the surface. It was at the bottom of the Hadal trenches, 7 miles below the waves. At that depth, the pressure is nearly 15,000 pounds per square inch. It is a place where a steel sphere would be crushed into a marble in a heartbeat. And yet, this was the home of the Zinthari. The Zinthari were the masters of negative pressure. They didn't build domes to keep the water out, they built vacuum pockets. Their cities were encased in a field of pure, absolute nothingness. This vacuum barrier acted as the perfect shield. Lasers were refracted and lost their focus as they transitioned from the crushing water into the empty space. Torpedoes would explode against the barrier, but because there was no medium inside to carry the shockwave, the blast would simply dissipate harmlessly against the nothing. To the Zinthari, the breathers from the surface were delicate, buoyant, and pathetic. They viewed the human expeditionary force as a minor annoyance, like a swarm of bubbles trying to fight a mountain. They come in their thick-hulled toys. High Lord Valos of the Zinthari pulsed, his bioluminescent skin glowing with a mocking shade of violet. They think their metal can survive our domain. They do not understand that the ocean itself is our guardian. To reach us, they must fight the weight of a world. And the world always wins. The first human attempts to reach the Zinthari trenches were disasters. The standard deep diver subs were designed for Earth's oceans, but Aquatica X was deeper and more aggressive. The Zinthari didn't even have to fire a shot. They simply sat in their silent, beautiful vacuum domes and watched as the human vessels reached their crush depth, groaned, and imploded into scrap metal. "Admiral, we've lost 3 more recon units," the tactical officer reported on the bridge of the UNS Deep Hammer. "Their shields are a literal vacuum. We can't burn through nothing. And our torpedoes are just making bubbles." Admiral Elias Deep Sea Drake stared at the sonar maps. He was a man who had spent his life in the pressure cooker environments of Jupiter's moons. He didn't see the ocean as a barrier. He saw it as a giant, preloaded spring. "The Zinthari think they're safe because they've built a no-man's land between them and the water," Drake growled, his voice a low vibration that seemed to match the hum of the ship. "They think the vacuum protects them. But a vacuum isn't just empty space. It's a debt. And the ocean is the one who collects." He turned to his lead engineer. "Is the tungsten sledge ready for deployment?" "Ready, sir," the engineer replied. "Solid core, unpowered, and weighted for maximum descent velocity." "Good," Drake said. "Stop trying to blow them up. Start trying to pierce them." The humans didn't send more submarines. They brought the pressure needles. These were not complex machines. They were 10-meter-long, 3-ton bolts of solid tungsten, shaped like sharpened pencils. They had no engines. They had no electronics. They were just pure, unadulterated mass. The Zinthari watched on their sonar as thousands of these needles were released from the human fleet on the surface. "They are dropping rocks?" Valos laughed, his skin flashing green. "They think to stone us through 7 miles of water? The friction of the ocean will slow them. The currents will drift them. By the time they reach our domes, they will be as harmless as falling leaves." But Valos didn't understand the gospel of momentum in a high-pressure environment. The tungsten sledges were designed to fall straight. Because they were so dense, the water resistance was negligible compared to their weight. They didn't slow down, they accelerated. For 7 miles, gravity pulled those 3-ton bolts through the deep. By the time they reached the trenches, they were traveling at speeds that turned the surrounding water into a boiling cavitation tunnel. The first sledge hit the main dome of the Zinthari capital. Tum. It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was a mechanical impact of such violence that it shook the tectonic plate beneath the city. The tungsten sledge didn't break the vacuum dome, it pierced it. A single tiny hole, no wider than a man's arm, was punched through the negative pressure field and into the city. In a normal environment, a small hole is a problem. At 7 miles deep, a small hole is the end of a civilization. The Zinthari High Lord Valos watched in horror as a jet of water, moving with the force of 1,000 industrial cutters, screamed through the hole. The nothing that had protected them was now their greatest weakness. The vacuum didn't offer any resistance. The ocean, which had been pushing against the dome for eons with billions of tons of pressure, finally found an entrance. "Seal it!" Valos shrieked. "Deploy the pressure gels. Close the breach." But it was too late. The first hole created a structural weakness. And the humans weren't dropping one sledge. They were dropping thousands. Crack, shatter, crash. Dome after dome began to fail. The tungsten sledges rained down like the hammers of a god. They didn't need to be precise, they just needed to hit. Once the vacuum was breached, the ocean did the rest of the work for the humans. The pressure equalization was catastrophic. The Zinthari cities, which had been built for zero pressure, were instantly pancaked by the weight of the water. The vacuum pockets didn't just fill up, they imploded with the force of a nuclear blast. The Zinthari themselves, delicate, bioluminescent creatures of the void, were crushed into jelly before they could even understand what was happening. Admiral Drake watched the seismic readouts. Direct hit. The trenches are collapsing. He didn't celebrate. He just looked at the dark water on his screen. They thought the pressure was their shield. They didn't realize it was just a hammer we hadn't learned to swing yet. The humans didn't need to dive into the deep. They didn't need to fight the Zinthari in their own domain. They simply used the environment itself as a weapon. They turned the pressure decree against its own masters. Humanity had proven the ultimate physical HFY truth. The universe is full of places that are too deep, too hot, or too heavy for us. But we are the species that looks at 1,000,000 tons of pressure and doesn't see a threat. We see a power source. We don't fight the ocean. We let the ocean do the fighting for us. The Zinthari throne was crushed that day. Not by a laser but by a rock in the weight of their own home. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. The weight is heavy. The message is clear that if you enjoyed this crushing victory over the deep-sea aliens, hit that like button. Comment below. What's the most terrifying environment you can imagine humans conquering? Subscribe for the next conquest of Saga 12, the Vacuum Pact. The pressure is equalized. The deep is ours.